Hello again, everyone. I hope you've had a really fun time. So I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage, yes, the host of Meet the Press,
Hi, everybody.
Chuck Todd.
I took note of anybody that didn't clap.
Yeah, this is Washington, long
Come
memories.
on now. Yeah.
So we're also periscoping the session. So as the usual reminder, we'll take questions on Twitter with the digital Beltway hashtag and on Periscope. So make sure to send us your thoughts. And if I'm looking at my phone, it's not because I'm checking texts. It's because that is where you are engaging. So
Don't lie. Maybe you sneak in a text.
So what's really interesting is that you have taken over as moderator of a Sunday morning show when everything about Sunday morning shows is changing.
Sure.
So what have you observed, and what do you see the future as being?
Well, look, I think the biggest obstacle, right, when you think about Sunday morning television and political news and information and policy and all that stuff, is the idea that the news cycle. It's not a 24-hour news cycle. It's a 24-minute news cycle, right? It's a 24-second news, whatever 24 cliche you want to throw in there. And so then what does that mean? How does that change the nature of what Sunday's about? And so I think that part of the challenge is some people look at Sunday morning television and see it as a legacy. You know, it's just something that's, oh, that was a great idea in the 20th century, but, you know, political conversation, policy conversation, that's all changed. That's taken place in other places. But I think that a couple of things have made me feel good that I'm not, you know, my whole goal is not to be the last moderator of Meet the Press. You know, the longest running television show, you want to not be the last one. And you, of course, you want to be able to feel as if you get to pass the baton. But that there is still a demand for it, right? There's a demand. There's the upside of having this Sunday morning platform is that you do have a lot of viewers who believe and a lot of the public who believes they're so inundated with information, they would like a place to sort of make sense of it all a little bit. We've noticed that, for instance, with nightly news. Viewership actually, after 5, 6, 7 years of going down, evening newscasts have started to rise a little bit in audience. And I think, and we're seeing a little bit of that on Sunday morning in general too, plus with our show. And I think a lot of it has to do with this idea that there's so much out there, they're actually looking for trusted filters. So that gives me hope that there's a future for Meet the Press. And of course, the other part of it, and I think one of the reasons why NBC handed me the keys to this, is they also wanted to make it an everyday brand. And I think that's been the challenge. That's the challenge I have, is how do you make Meet the Press relevant Monday through Saturday?
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned that what's new is not necessarily what's news anymore on Sunday, right? Because things are moving so fast. And so how do you push forward that idea of analysis? What kind of guests do you have on? How do you offer something new to people who, on a variety of platforms, may have heard already the nut of what you're talking about?
Right. I think part of it is, you know, you want new angles, new takes. You do your best of like what's going to be news the following week. I mean, that to me is a huge emphasis. I always think about what's going to happen, you know, what's going to be the conversation on Tuesday. And, you know, particularly in politics, it's not always predictive, but it is somewhat. There is a, you know, you can know this in Washington, and hopefully with our experiences, figure that out. So that I think I always want to make sure some of it's there. I think that the trap, you know, Sunday morning television becomes less appointment viewing if it's a week in review. Mm-hmm. And anytime it feels, and you know, we know it on staff. Like we'll sit there on a Saturday morning sometimes, and we meet 6 days a week. The only day we don't meet is Mondays, and right after the show. Monday's our weekend, as we always say. And every day we sort of say, if we were doing the show tomorrow, how would we lay it out, type of thing. And you go through this exercise. And I kind of wish we were taping all of our editorial meetings on Tuesday, so that on Saturday we look back and see, what would we have done if this were Tuesday, type of thing. What was the conversation we were having Tuesday? But I think we're very comfortable saying, you got to be comfortable scrapping the whole show on a Saturday and saying, you know, we got to redo this rundown. This feels like a week in review show. It's no longer about a new show. It's no longer advancing the story.
Mm-hmm. So part of that is that you are both participating on social media, but also struggling with the speed of social media, right? The way that it delivers news, having to monitor it, the way that it can change the news cycle in a second. So as you're looking at the future of Meet the Press, what's the digital strategy? What's the appropriate way to take a look at social media and what it means for audience engagement?
Well, look, I think that what I don't think it is you don't say to yourself, how do I put Meet the Press on Twitter? How do I put Meet the Press on Mashable? That's not what it is. There's the Sunday morning program that is what it is. I think it still needs to be a place where you can have an extended interview. It's still a place, everything is so fast moving that you actually need a place to sit down and breathe. You need to sit down and have a longer. So I still want this Sunday morning to have that feel and to be that place. I think what it is you take the Meet the Press mindset of the topics you cover, what's important, what should matter, and you use that as your filter to the Twitter, to your Twitter feed, and to your Facebook feed, and to what you want to do on different social media platforms, where it's sort of a Meet the Press mindset, but it's not necessarily taking only what you do in the program and chopping it up to make it digestible on these other platforms. It's doing original content on those other platforms.
Now that you host Meet the Press, how do you use Twitter and Facebook? How's it changed your approach?
Twitter is, I haven't really changed my approach on Twitter. I have always viewed Twitter as an information feed to me. Like, Twitter at its best is like the best wire, is the best wire service you can create. My favorite time to be on Twitter is 5 in the morning. Because at 5 in the morning, all I'm getting, and I go back 8 hours, and at 5 in the morning, all I'm getting is news. I have, you name the newspaper, and I follow their Twitter feed, and if they have it chopped up in their political feed and political reporters, and that's when Twitter is all information. Once 9 a.m. hits on Twitter, then it's all snark, right? Then it's all commentary, but it's no longer information driven. So I still use Twitter in the same way in that respect. To me, it's truly a vehicle to do, professionally, to do two things: get information and deliver information. I have found the biggest change for me is engaging on Facebook. I was not a Facebook person. It's certainly a good place for whatever reason I may have let my Facebook page get the personal and professional too intermingled. So then, I didn't feel comfortable putting my kids' pictures on there because there was too many people that were following me for political reporting, and I just was like, I don't feel like separating it out. That seems like work, and I have found Facebook to be a great place to do serious viewer engagement. Like, that's where I've had the good viewer engagement, plus on email, where anybody that does bother to send an email, which feels like snail mail now, right?
Yeah.
If you get an email, you're like, geez, it's
Does
like
that
getting
go through the post office?
Is that right? Is that like getting a letter in the mail? The viewer engagement on Facebook is, because it's less snarky. I think part of it is not anonymous, right? That helps, but that's been more fulfilling than I expected.
What's the nature of that engagement?
It could be just suggestions on issues. Look, I want to use it, not just telling you what's coming up on the show, but, here's something that sort of interested me today. This has sort of popped in my head. What do you guys think? And it's funny, when you go on Twitter and say, hey, what do you think of this story? The commentary you get back is all snark, 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 snark. You do that on Facebook, and you're going to get 5% snark. You're going to get 20% of just red and blue arguing with each other on your Facebook page. And then, which is always kind of fun, you're like, whoa, get out of my house. Go do this in your house. But then you're actually going to get some interesting suggestions and ideas, or at least thoughtful commentary, or more questions that you feel as if, you feel as if you're both getting something out of it. So that's where I've been hopeful that, not all social media is just hate-filled.
Well, one of the things about social media, there was an interesting profile of Kris Jenner, the matriarch of the Kardashians, where it said that she had 2 cameras on her at all times. And, the political world often feels like that. People know that they're watched. Candidates know that they're watched. The people who are guests on your show know that. How do you access them and try to get something interesting in a world that's increasingly managed for those multiple cameras?
I think this is the biggest problem. This is my greatest fear of covering the 2016 race, is that I think the unintended consequence of 47% is what I call it. Because what the 47% moment did was sort of, I think, the lesson that campaign operatives took from it and candidates took from it is, you're always on. Even when you're in private, you're always on. Anything can and will be held against you in the court of public opinion. So I think it is, you already see the walls. You feel as if candidates are always speaking from a script now, even when they're supposedly in unscripted moments. Everything feels staged. And I think the public's going to figure that out. I mean, I actually think the opportunity here for a candidate, the breakout candidate that we're not talking about yet, and I'm not, because I don't know who it is, but I think the breakout candidate is going to be the one that is not just realizes they're always on, but is comfortable being themselves when they're always on, that is willing to make a gaffe at 9 o'clock in the morning, but realizes they're still going to be on the record all day, and they'll say something clever that'll bury the gaffe, or they'll instantly respond and all this stuff, and just sort of be always on the record. Mm-hmm. You know, I actually think I think the public would respond in a very positive way, because we're so used to politicians not being that way, that if somebody wants to break out and be different from a very crowded field on the Republican side, I think that's a way to do it.
What's the realest moment you've seen in an interview?
Well, I had one on my show between Rudy Giuliani and Michael Eric Dyson. It was during Ferguson mm-hmm. at the time. And Rudy Giuliani, he was on remote, and at some point he was responding to something Michael Eric Dyson said, and all of a sudden you just saw, he said, you know, you need those white cops to protect you in this neighborhood, and it just, all of a sudden you're seeing here on live television, and I'm just, as they say, it's getting real. And, you know, Michael Eric Dyson, and you just realize you just sort of let the moment go, and they just had this, and you can go on YouTube and see it, and it's a very uncomfortable moment on television, and yet a very revealing moment. It's exactly what live television's about sometimes, is that you felt as if it was very real. Mm-hmm. You learned a lot about Rudy Giuliani in that moment, and his views on law enforcement, and I think you learned a lot about Michael Eric Dyson in that moment. And it just, like I said, the cameras could have been off, and that same conversation would have been had, and that same sort of heated debate would have taken place. So I would say that was it certainly wasn't a realization the cameras were on.
Mm-hmm. Was that also the most unexpected moment?
It's certainly in this, yes, I would say it's easily the most unexpected. Yeah. You know, you just are so used to, especially a guy like Giuliani who's run for president, who's been a practiced politician, to say something that you would say, wow, he's going to make himself the story here. Mm-hmm. And you're not used to a professional politician doing that to themselves.
What does your producer say in your ear when that happens?
Oh, well, usually the producer in my ear is always saying, we're out of time, get out of here. And on this one, you know, we've really gotten pretty good at it. He can read my faces and read my expression. We have little cues and all this stuff. He'll say, that has to be the last question, and I'll just do something like this, and he'll know, oh, I'm asking one more question no matter what he says or not, but I do little signals. And on this one, you know, I just sort of put my hands down, and he sees that I'm not trying to jump in, and I remember on that one with Giuliani and Dyson, he says, just let it go. Just let it go. I mean, you know when you see a moment that you don't want to cut it off.
What's the biggest news story you've seen so far this year?
Biggest news story, geez. I think the biggest story, and I don't want to say an individual event, there's two ways to look at it. I mean, I think the biggest story of the year is the racial tension mm-hmm. Between law enforcement and the African American community, and the fact that there seems to be the most shocking part of it. There seems to be consensus political opinion that it's a problem. Like, I grew up in Miami in the 70s and 80s. We had these same tensions between the law enforcement and different minority communities. It wasn't just African Americans, but there wasn't a consensus opinion that it was a problem, right? It was literally, it was split along racial lines whether it was a problem. Because of the advent of the camera, I mean, I think, you know, there's probably no two more powerful moments than what happened on Staten Island and what happened in North Charleston that has changed public opinion on an issue that African Americans have been talking about for 2 generations, mm-hmm. well, arguably longer than that, but at least 2 generations in the modern era. And here we are, suddenly there's consensus. So it's on one hand, I'm optimistic that it means, well, if there's a consensus and agreement that there's a problem, we can do something about it. But the speed with which we suddenly got that consensus, and it's very much driven by technology. Mm-hmm. I think when you look at this year so far, that feels like the biggest news story of the year.
And what's interesting about that story is that the coverage of the story is as much a part of it. You know, it's something that if you follow the protests, the protesters talk about. How do we talk about issues like that and make it a part of the public discourse with intelligence and compassion?
Well,
What do you have to watch for?
I mean, you know, the worst time to try to have the intelligent conversation is in the middle of the heat, right? You know, in the middle of the event itself. You know, what we have to figure out as a society right now in media, and frankly in the way people consume media, is we need to have these serious discussions, but in many ways you can have a better discussion 2 weeks later, when sort of things have settled down. You're not covering the moment, you're not covering the event. In some ways the event can get in the way of the conversation you need to have in this case, but we don't have the attention span to do that for some reason, us in the media, nor the viewer, because we may try to do it and then the viewer doesn't watch. You know, we contributed this, but it's a vicious cycle. You know, we would do more if people responded more, and you know, sometimes you see those decisions get made on what gets covered and what doesn't. But that's the thing we got to change, so we can have the education conversation, the economic development conversation, and the law enforcement conversation.
What's also challenging about that conversation is who gets heard. So how do you go about choosing guests? What do you think about, you know, when has somebody been a quote unquote successful guest, especially on tough topics like this?
Well, it's just making sure it's relevant. Making sure it's not just relevant that the person that you have is an expert. I mean, one of the things that I've said that I want to avoid, one of the cliche critiques of the Sunday morning genre is the same senators are on all the time. And I agree. Now, the senators that are on all the time are the only ones that actually say anything interesting, right? Which is why they end up on all the time. That said, they are coming across as if they're elected pundits, because they're also not senators that are doing anything. They're saying interesting things, but they're not getting anything done. And so we are in a period where, to me, the most successful guests we've had are when we've made sure we've done everything we can to get out of Washington. Because right now, the least interesting, the least, I don't want to say intelligent, because there's plenty of intelligent people under that dome, but the least intellectually stimulating leaders right now are the ones based in Washington. The action's happening outside of Washington. So the most successful and interesting guests we've had is when we make this concerted effort to make sure, you know, a story about inner city issues has people that are from that city, leaders of that city, maybe leaders of other cities who have a unique insight, but not just your typical Washington, D.C. person.
That was an interesting theme with Commissioner Rosenworcel again. How do you make sure that you hear the points of view from those other places? How do you expand your own ability to hear what's out there?
I mean, I think that's our job. I mean, it's sort of like when Meet the Press has been at its best over the last 50 years, it's when it's been a place that brought voices to a conversation that hadn't been brought to during the week. I still want to sort of make sure that's the case, and I'd like to think that if you look at what we've done over the last 9 months, we have tried to diversify the voices. And when I say diversity, diversity doesn't always mean color of skin. Diversity also means socioeconomic diversity. Diversity also means geographic. Diversity also means ideological. There's a lot of ways and so to me it's relevant diversity in the topic that you're dealing in. Mm-hmm. And that's what you want to, so that you have relevant points of view that matter, not just saying, oh, I need a left-right here. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not always a left-right. Okay? You know, sometimes it's not that. Maybe it's a geographic two different points of view that you need.
Right. One of the interesting things about the internet age is that the populace, that the people who are the audience or the constituents or the group, has taken on so much prominence in how we think about how we're phrasing something. Whether you're a politician or whether you're a journalist, we are thinking about audience engagement in bigger and more sophisticated ways than, you know, previously happened, when a lot of these decisions were made in cloistered kind of environments. So one of the things that the White House has been doing and other places as well is trying to take their message straight to the people on Facebook or on Medium and not so much using journalism or media as a filter. What do you think of that?
Politicians have been trying to do that for centuries. They're always going around. They always want to go around the filter, whoever the filter is. Look, I think I understand their motivation for doing that, but I actually think that over the long term, they could lose credibility doing that, because look, the audience is pretty savvy and frankly cynical, and so yes, it's unfiltered. They may be cynical about me filtering the news, but at the same time, they also want to, I think they also want to see the president challenged. And so if he's going unchallenged, or if their point of view is going unchallenged, they think, oh, it's nothing more than a brochure presentation too. So I think I get what they're doing politically. It's a way to have a direct conversation, but usually the only people that they're having an impact with are people that already are with them on a given issue and with them on a given topic. What they're not going to get if they avoid the filter is having the conversation with people that might be skeptical but persuadable. And that's where I think that they shouldn't think of it as a replacement, because I think the only people that will listen will be the people that already agree with them.
Right. Well, this is actually kind of one of the risks of engagement, right? And this is actually now has been backed up by a scientific study, but people like to be agreed with, especially on the internet. They like to be around people who agree with them. They like to see opinions that are largely in accord with what they already believe. So how do you picture the viewer, and then how do you bring them in to ideas that they may find offensive or ideologically against what they need to hear?
One of my goals on the show is I hope everybody's uncomfortable for at least 5 minutes, right? A good Meet the Press means so that maybe your point of view's been challenged. Maybe you don't like somebody else's point of view, but you heard it. Maybe it made you angry. I had somebody say, I love your show. I talk back at you sometimes. And I said, that's okay. That's good. If you're not talking back at me, I'm not looking for an amen choir. So I think that to me, like especially now, what you just described, I think that's an opportunity for Sunday morning, because we should be a place where you feel as if, okay, we're going to gather all sides of an issue. I don't want to say both sides, because there's more than two sides sometimes, obviously, but all sides of an issue, so that look, I have a very engaged audience, right? I'm going to have somebody that's choosing to tune in to Sunday morning probably already has an opinion. Probably already knows what they believe on a certain issue, but maybe wants to find out, why can't it get implemented? Like, why doesn't the president's idea get implemented? Well, let me find out. What is it that the other side is doing to holding it up, and why are they doing it? What's their motivation? But if we get to be that place, because maybe that viewer only does what you say, they only follow people they agree with, they only read people they agree with, it's a way for them to get them out of their opinion bubble that they live in. That said, one of the more interesting pieces, quote, of advice / warnings I got from a journalist friend of mine who said, we live in a different age, meaning people tune into politics looking for, people are looking for affirmation and basically looking to win, looking to see if their side's winning an argument, rather than trying to find out, which argument is right or which part of the debate, and that the way people watch political television has changed. I hope they're wrong. But I get it. They're not. I mean, I certainly, that's the way social media sort of splits things up a little bit.
On that note, we're actually all out of time, but I wish we could talk longer. Chuck, Todd, thank you very much.
You got it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.